And we are live. So, hello, everybody, all of you watching the session today. It's great to have you here. Thank you once again for taking out time from your busy schedule to attend this webinar today. Today's webinar will provide you with the insight into the art of persuasion and how to use it to your advantage in business administration. So in order to go ahead and talk more about it, I have with me today Dr. PD Million Hills. So I'm not going to take much of our time. I'm just going to go ahead and straight away pass on the mic to him so that he can take you into the world of persuasion. Dr. Mills, Yay. It's all yours.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sankit, and thanks for all your administration of behind the scenes to make this session possible. Fantastic, and great to be with you all today. And thanks, as Sankit says, for making time to share some learning, and hopefully this will begin to equip you with some additional tools to your probably already bulging toolkit of ways to influence and persuade and achieve what you need to do in business, but maybe also beyond that in your personal development, professional development as well. Feel free to join with me on LinkedIn and ask me any further questions after this event. Very happy to keep the conversation going. I've got a lot more to say about this topic, as you might imagine. So I've picked out some key themes, and I'm really apologies. I think I was muted for ages. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today, and to Sankit for administering behind the scenes, making everything work perfectly. And thanks so much for making time in your schedules, as he said, to learn with us today. And my ambition really is to help you equip your toolkits of persuasion and influence and achieving what you need to do in business, and beyond that, perhaps in professional and personal development. And feel free to join with me on LinkedIn and follow any further articles I write on this kind of topic, but also to keep the conversation going. And I'm very happy to share any of my thoughts, or if you want any further suggested readings, that's not a problem whatsoever. So I'm going to have a very, very simple slide deck today. It's just one slide, and really it's just speaker's notes to remind me what I'm going to be saying. And the key subliminal, but also very obvious link I want to make, connection I want to make, concept I want to transfer to you really is this one of toolkit, because when it comes to persuasion in business, in management, in leadership, you need different tools for different situations. And if you're trying to communicate with a customer who has never had an engagement with your brand or company or your family or whatever else, you're going to need a very different selection of tools to achieve the effects you need in dealing with them, as you would for dealing with, for example, a C-suite, or if you are responding to a tender which you want to win, and you've got to persuade the people in the room that they should ditch their traditional supplier, facilities management or security or whatever else, and take the leap and contract with yourselves. So that whole notion of toolkit, which I take from very deep and complicated social science theory, but actually it is also one of common sense, which is really that, and it's backed up by those quotes, which I'm sure you've read online, and they're attributed to all sorts of different people, which basically say that if you have a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. And you see a lot of businesses taking that approach, where they have one style of communication, one style of doing things, and perhaps for a while that works really well, and then after a while it really, really doesn't. And for example, you might see businesses continuing to engage with their employees or customers in ways which really do look and feel outdated compared with the current world. I had an encounter recently with a government department, and the interface that the operative was using to enter data was incredibly old and incredibly clunky and difficult, and it made the service they could offer to me so much worse, so much slower, and he was so hugely distracted by the challenge of entering data into this interface, and it constantly rejecting what he'd entered, and so on and so forth. It was really a very high friction, some people would call it sludgy, type of interaction. So if you're trying to persuade people that you're running, an awesome service which is very smooth, and you, the user, the customer, will never experience any friction or delays or annoyance, or you can't see cost being racked up that shouldn't be racked up, and then you have to sit across the desk from someone who's attempting to wrestle information, data into a system, and really struggling, there's a huge disconnect, a huge contradiction there between the offer, we're really efficient, we're really good at what we do, and we're totally dedicated to you, the customer, and then the poor person actually who's engaging with the customer being distracted, struggling, stressing, as a fight with the system. And ultimately he had to call a colleague of his to remind him to actually close the session and to upload the data from our interaction. Now, that's really fascinating, because in that world, the cost didn't really matter. Got to engage with this department. So what choice have I got? Oh, I've got zero choice whatsoever. And that's often the case for citizens, unfortunately. But in other businesses, of course, that level of friction is unacceptable. And therefore, you would be de-persuading people to have anything to do with a business if that was the way in which you engaged with the user. So in contrast, I recently bought some new mobile phone data packages for my kids, and the experience was unbelievably easy in comparison to what I expected. And also the individual who was serving us, very friendly chap, had only been doing the job for a little while. He needed to ask a few questions, and there was loads of staff in the shop as well, and they all joined in the conversation. It was really very entertaining, and also meant that he solved our any of the kind of problems that we raised, and he learned from other people's experiences, and everyone ended that really happily. And that certainly improved my fairly kind of neutral perspective of our mobile phone brand that I went into the shop with. And I couldn't tell you the last time I'd been into a mobile phone shop, because you do awful lot of that ordering and all these days online, and switching between companies isn't something that I've done either for a very long time. So I've had no need to go into one of these shops for so long. But having done so, it was, I'm not saying it was a clubhouse type experience, but it was one where I and the kids felt valued, and an interest was taken in us. But they solved our problem so quickly. And in terms of persuading us to remain with the brand, again, this is a key message I think it'd be great to underscore today. There really wasn't any persuasion needed that this was the right brand to stay with, and that if we have issues in future, or we want to, I don't know, buy more devices or whatever, it's extremely likely we'll go back. So there was no formal persuasion going on. There was no sales funnel or any of those really high pressure, not very nice mechanistic ways of dealing with people involved at all. It was a very human interaction, despite it all being about SIMs and data plans and etc. So that was super good. So when I speak today about the art of persuasion, and I'll get going through this this shopping list of topics to cover very shortly, I suppose one of the key learning points as well, which will be great for everyone to recognize and own and take away and help build into that toolkit, really, is that there is no one way of doing it, either for a brand, a problem, for you, and so on. So it's not as though you need to kind of crack the code on how to do persuasion, either generally or for a specific challenge. It's a really creative activity where maybe more guerrilla, maybe very low cost ways of doing the act of persuasion might be a great deal more effective than spending thousands of dollars or pounds or whatever other currency on a professional agency to help you do the marketing, the sales, the pre-sales, whatever else we're going to divide that persuasion process up into. And when I come on to speak about authenticity and consistency, as I will do a little bit later, the more open, the more authentic, the more real you can be in doing your persuasion, which itself is the outcome of a load of other activities. The persuasion is done inside the heads of those that you're communicating with. Of course, we can't actually persuade. All we can do is give people information and offers and an emotional experience, and then they will make a decision, and that will be the moment at which persuasion is occurring. If I'm trying to get someone to do something, I suppose you could see that as a process of persuasion, but it really isn't very helpful to think about it like that. So there's no one way of doing it. There's no magic trick. There's no amazing book you can buy or course you can sign up to which will teach you exactly how to do it every single time, and it's also authentic to you and what you're capable and comfortable and effective at doing. If you are someone who knows that you will never lead from the front in terms of social media or having a billboard with your actual face on it, really putting your personality and your persona into the brand or the branch of the business, for example, that you're working in, that's totally fine. But someone needs to be there that is a real person who works in that business and that people recognize as summing up something important about your brand, whether it's an openness to diversity, something about honesty, or something else. There's really nothing worse really than the opposite, which is a lack of authenticity, a lack of a personal summation of a brand and experience and offer. And I recently reviewed a website for, and in fact, an entire journey for a company, and it was totally obvious that almost all of the imagery, the photography on the website was stock photography. The classic picture of, call us now, and there's a beautifully made up, super glamorous person with a headset on who apparently is going to be, answering the call. And then the website also didn't have a phone number to call. It was in fact a chatbot. So you had a picture of someone with a headset on, looking super glamorous, call us anytime, literally written out in text. But then the actual interaction was through a chatbot. So lots of things which don't quite add up there. And obviously the look and the feel of stock photography is very different and not terribly authentic, and definitely an area where it's worth perhaps having something which is slightly lower quality in terms of being pixel perfect and super high quality, but it's actually real, so that actually you have a picture of someone who actually works in the call center, maybe have their first name or something, or maybe it's you. Maybe another way of really persuading people that you stand behind your brand and your brand is all about the people, and that you interact as a customer with the real people who actually care about you, the customer, in a very real way, is to have opportunities of contacting the chief executive or the head of whatever it is directly. Why not? And it's still relatively unusual for that to be easy. Now, those of us who have had issues with enforcing our consumer rights as to the quality of a product we've bought, have learned a long time ago that the best way, often the only way, of getting an issue resolved, getting a complaint actioned, is to find a way to get to someone in the C-suite, and they probably have a little team around them who deal with things which bubble up to that level, and they will own the problem and fix it. And that's way more effective than fighting your way through all the automated telephone, what are they called, IFRs, or communicating on Twitter through direct messaging and such like. All that can work really well, but many companies still aren't well set up to achieve that. If you really want to get your message across and get your situation resolved, getting direct access to very senior people is the way to do it. Maybe not direct to them, it'll be picked up by one of their team, but they will actually then have the ability at the top of the hierarchy of the company to sort it all out. But the great thing about persuading customers and users that you take them seriously and that you are a very human who has very human connections and cares about customers and users, is that you do have that direct contact. Now, you need to be able to service that, so we need a big enough team to achieve that. But it's again a kind of an untapped potential, I think, to maintain that ongoing ability to persuade people that your business is better and different, more human, more approachable than others. And that's that I think is a form of competitive advantage. And I saw that even the other day, just for a company which offers kind of coach holidays and such like for tends to be older people in the UK. And yeah, the chief executive or company director, can't remember what his job title was, actually had his direct contact details in the brochure. So if you had any issues, but you also knew that if there were any complaints, you had this direct point of contact which you could go to, which takes away some of the concern about what happens if the hotel isn't up to standard. If something goes wrong, then you've got this direct link to the top of the shop, as we might call it. So although those things on the face of it don't appear to be to do with persuasion, of course they are, because they're all factoring into the complex calculus or algorithm that goes into a customer or a user making a decision about whether to buy a product from you, to come through the front door of a shop, to sign up for a subscription with you, to apply for a job with you, to tell someone else about the business or the offer, even though that offer isn't relevant to me. If I'm not into horse riding, but I see an amazing deal for equestrian clothing or supplements for horses to eat or something, and I happen to have some friends who are into horse riding. This is a totally fictional example. I really don't know anyone in horse riding, I don't think. But anyway, if I did, my eyeballs capture that information, something holds in my head, in my memory, and then I pass that on free of charge to the company. So those potential customers, as a result of having interacted with a person, an advertisement, an event, or something else. So yeah, persuasion is a very complex process where we can't know every variable that goes into the decision making of the individual customer or user, but we need to map as many of them as possible. And by map, I also mean list or experiment or spreadsheet or database or whatever else. We need to keep our minds very open to the wide range of considerations that a customer or a user brings to the interaction, where we hope to lead to a decision-making process where the outcome is favorable to us, or certainly isn't disfavorable. And that is the power of persuasion, if that works. And sometimes the element of persuasion isn't about getting someone to sign up or to stay loyal or to pass on information about an offer to someone else. It is actually to do something in that they're already a customer, they're already staying with us. We don't need to do much to keep them on board, but we want to get their feedback, whether that's for an NPS, Net Promoter Score survey, or what else could we do better? Could you recommend us to someone else? If we asking people to do additional things, then we need to be able to persuade them to invest that time or attention to do it. So typically after you've phoned a call center, or after you've got a quote from a website, or in person, you'll get the follow-up emails, and this might be part of one of those fairly terrible funnels, but might not be, which sort of say, is there anything else that you need from us? Or if you've completed the process, could you rate your experience with us? How likely are you to recommend us to a friend or family member? The classic NPS question. But we need to persuade people to invest the time to complete that and to give us better data. The more people who complete those processes and give us that data, the better insight we have, the more confidence we have that a very high NPS score is kind of reliable, because there's a big sample, and we're not kind of chasing very poor quality data and trying to make decisions based on those. So that's quite a lengthy starter to the presentation today. So let me, as it were, change the pace a little bit and dip back into history, not terribly ancient, but somewhat history. And that really is the credentials around why it is that I have something interesting to say. Though, of course, that interest is to be measured by you, the listener. So it's up to you really to decide whether it's interesting. But I am here competing for your attention and hoping that you'll be interested in what I'm saying. And even if not, that the ideas maybe spark off thoughts, considerations, ideas to research that otherwise you wouldn't have had, and altogether still complementing that toolkit which one gets through any type of interaction like this, learning, and formally through MBA, DBA, and other programs. And that's really why we're here, of course, as well, to promote your commitment to, interest in, confidence to start and then take forward your educational journey with us. So my credentials then, well, if you attended my last session, you'll have heard a little bit about this, but I'm going to go into more detail today, so you don't need to listen to the opening quarter of an hour or so of that presentation. But my background is in the United Kingdom as being the first social anthropologist, a social scientist, applied social scientist, to work for the UK government, in particular in the early days with the Ministry of Defence. And my main scope of work there was around better understanding the needs of target audiences. Could be our own target audiences, so that might be how to train our senior military officers and civilians in how not to do bad things with their emails, so that they don't click on phishing links and things sent through. Or it could be better understanding the needs of audiences overseas, so that we are more effective in countering propaganda, lies, disinformation, and such like. So back then, and we're going back to the very late 90s, early 2000s, that whole area was known as influence operations, which is not really a terribly helpful term, but it kind of sums up what it was. And it was really ways of which we can get a message across, or at least put a message forward for consideration by people, because we can't persuade people we can't force people to listen to us or to believe us, no matter who we are, individuals or governments or militaries or brands. We really do have to put an offer out there and back it up with evidence, and have people, weigh things up, consider them, and then work out what their take is on it. And that whole psychology of persuasion approach is an interesting one, because when it comes to psychology and psychological research, almost all psychological research, that's probably an exaggeration, a very large amount, definitely the majority, I would say, is based on research that's been done with often university students, and in kind of laboratory controlled conditions. And you've probably heard of experiments like this. So asking people to, rate who's the most attractive face from piles and piles of, different faces and so on. Or, you're presented with this, what do you think? You're presented with something else, what do you think? And that's why you end up with research that shows that if you can persuade people to draw a snake or something else, then they're more likely to buy a product from you. Now, that's sort of interesting, but also kind of like a bit of a charlatan science, really, because the opportunities for a brand, a company, a government, a military to actually have enough people to get in front of customers or users or citizens and ask them to draw a snake, and then they're like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 times more likely to buy my product, my idea, my service. That's never going to happen. That's a purely sort of dinner party type anecdote. And whether it's super relevant in the real world outside the laboratory, I really, really doubt. And we're not remotely able to put blank bits of paper or digital screens in front of people, get them to draw something, and then say, oh, by the way, would you like to sign up to a subscription service of a delivery of freshly roasted coffee beans. That's just not going to happen. So an awful lot of the psychological literature and the models and Maslow's hierarchy of needs and many other so-called tools really aren't anything of the sort, and they certainly don't give you, although many claim they do, they don't give you that just add water type approach to enabling you to make a persuasive information campaign or marketing campaign just by reading 10 chapters and that will give you the answer. That's just not the case. Which is kind of reassuring, and it is a reminder that people are fairly unpredictable, and therefore, unless you're someone running a cult where you have the ability to very tightly control the range of media inputs to individuals, that people always have alternatives. They always have other distractions going on cognitively from other media, other activities, that you're never going to be able to persuade people in a how shall I say, not robust, but in a kind of overbearing way, thank goodness. And the kind of, although many of my ideas are drawn from a kind of a defense origin, what I would say is that that's always been done highly ethically, because if you are even remotely tempted as a business or anyone else to just force people to believe something and use just volume to endlessly repeat the same message and hope people are going to believe it, or say things which aren't exactly true and are easily falsifiable, that's going to catch up with you, and there is absolutely zero point in doing that. And it's often incredibly ineffective. So it's very effective in terms of spending a lot of money and achieving a lot of maybe you could even get your message in front of a lot of people, but it's going to be very ineffective in actually persuading people to think seriously about your offer and actually react in a useful way, in a positive way, and in an ethical way. So it's really important never to imagine that there's any dark arts in persuasion or marketing or anything else. And all of the literature around subliminal advertising and such like is total hocus pocus. I mean, there's no way you can subliminally influence people. The only sense in which anything around persuasion is subliminal is we often don't know why it is that people have made the choice they make. And there's a very famous quote attributed to I can't remember who it was attributed now, but anyway, it's about an advertising budget, and I think it was Lord Lever from the Leverhulme family, who owned very large producers of household detergents and other things, and he was very well, it's attributed to him. I guess he said it. Let's hope he said it. He always said that, he knew that 50% of his advertising budget worked. He just didn't know which 50%. And I think that probably remains the case now in terms of knowing precisely which activities it is led to a choice being made, a persuasive activity culminating in, opting to swap one car for another. Although you can suggest correlations, very difficult to say that they're causations. We may never know, which doesn't mean we shouldn't try and get great information in front of people and present our brands in the most imaginative and effective ways as possible. It just means because we never know which are the elements which absolutely work, we need to do lots of testing and make sure that we're not creating unintended miscommunications or areas for confusion, or communicating the wrong things about our brand accidentally, which is particularly a challenge when we're working cross-culturally, but often is the case within cultural communications as well. So basically, that's the background. And then I moved from just defence to a role in central government, really trying to achieve behaviour change for things which are in everyone's best interests, health and safety, business continuity, etc. But without compunction, i.e. making things painful if you don't stick with them. So that might typically be fining people or scaring them with the threat of fines. or even introducing new laws, new regulations. There's so much law and regulation around already, and an awful lot of these approaches are very much the stick as opposed to the carrot. And my view really is no one wants to be hit with the equivalent of a stick to get a behavior change. Far better to incentivize, and that incentivization can often be around great communication, which changes how people see the world, changes how people see what's important and why it is, for example, but there have to be restrictions on something. And we can then have better quality interactions, conversations with citizens. And that's something which I think has really, although I was far from being the only person involved in that, but it's led to things like the government digital service and the government digital standard in the UK, which really do put understanding individuals as much as we possibly can at the heart of any communications or policy change. And increasingly, those approaches are also to be found in businesses which are just doing super well and growing at a pace. So to be competitive in our communications, which enable us to hopefully trigger some persuasive activities taking place in the brains of our customers or users or potential customers, potential users, we do need to, I suggest, compete. And that competition is not just against those who are our direct competitors. So if I'm a car insurance company trying to differentiate from other car insurance companies, but also from other distractions, some other ways in which people spend their time. And that basically is competing against inertia, because if you're offering let's say a car insurance comparison website, which could deliver people amazing savings, but it's very difficult to use, it's a bit of a hassle, you have to sign up and then give all your details, and then you're going to get called by someone the next day. If someone has alternatives like, oh, I'll just pay what I'm paying at the moment, I can manage that, yeah, I could probably save a bit of money, but I can't really be bothered. Delayed gratification is not something many people are up for investing in. They really want the return, the information, to be able to make a decision more or less in the moment. And if you put lots and lots of stages, or God forbid, moving people from entering data on a web form to then, oh, I need to speak to someone and have a hard sell, that's really not a great way forward. However, if you can capture people's interest, imagination, excitement even about saving money or getting some free gifts or whatever for engaging with or ultimately contracting with a product or a service offered through a price comparison website, then that's all to the good for that brand. And that also has the ability of being great for the consumer, saving them money, giving them something extra as well, but also for the company, which has not had to invest in call center staff doing outbound calls to try and close a deal. It's all been transacted online super quickly, super effectively, super transparently, so that everyone can see the small print. You're not hiding anything in endless pages of legalese, and the interaction is done. And again, you might then, as a consumer, happily tell everyone in your social circle about how great that experience was, even though fundamentally car insurance, home insurance, these topics are pretty boring for most people. But even so, you can theoretically make the process more exciting and therefore capture and hold that attention. So that's in terms of like with a direct competitor, like getting people to consider a new insurance provider as opposed to an old one, but also what one's doing with almost every offer, I think, as a business, is you're competing against entertainment or online dating or other things. And in a job I had recently in the HR talent acquisition and development space, one of the ideas I was thinking a lot about was the fact that quite often when people are comfortable in a job or reasonably comfortable or can live with a job that they've got, When it comes to trying to get great talent to apply to join great companies, you might well be competing with that great talent sitting on their sofa watching Netflix, or doing online dating, or investing in stocks and shares or something. You're not just talking about LinkedIn versus Indeed versus whatever other platform, Job Monster or whatever. So increasingly, I think there's the competition for capturing and holding attention is really about how we cut through the noise, the competition from entertainment, from all the other offers which we can kind of speculate are circulating around an individual, plus other things going on in their life. Bad weather, dark evenings, the challenges of parenting, the challenges of dating, the delights of parenting, the delights of dating, training for mandatory training you've got to do as part of your job. There's a lot of things that you are maybe unaware that are circulating around an individual customer and user, and your challenge in trying to achieve persuasion is to at least for some minutes across a week cut through that and persuade someone to land on the offer that you're putting in front of them. And a bit like, you know, throwing a baited hook into a pond which you hope is full of fish, making sure that you hook the right ones. So in terms of those topics then, I really think it's great for all of us to consider widening our reading, and I've done that kind of accidentally, and not all of it is reading. So I spend a lot of time now consuming podcasts, as I'm sure many of us do, and other forms of content, but or also transcriptions from podcasts and webinars also mean we can read stuff at speed, as opposed to just having to listen to it or go back to it and try and understand a bit more. And I just wanted to mention three actually, content creators, let's call them. One of them is an author, but content creators. So the first one is Chris Do, who runs or co-runs a consultancy in the US, which is largely based on a business pipeline around everything web, I suppose, everything app and web. But he's a very thoughtful guy, and on the various podcasts and interviews and teachings, ruminations that he does, both around how he structures his workday through to giving feedback to people developing their careers in web design and associated skills and trades and arts and maybe sciences. He has some really, really interesting content, and often I find myself having thoughts which, as I said at the top of today's presentation, I wouldn't otherwise have had. Hopefully I'm achieving that effect as well today. Probably not in such a slick way as Chris does, but he's a very good person to follow, and YouTube is a great place to start with him. A slightly more controversial character, who the Americans would describe as a bit potty-mouthed, is Gary Vaynerchuk, who is an American Belarusian entrepreneur. He is someone to be taken with a slight pinch of salt, I think, in terms of what he says, but he does say an awful lot of things which are very interesting from a marketing, particularly digital marketing perspective. And one of his go-to terms is really around day trading attention. And really, I should, I guess, give him some credit, at least for me mentioning earlier about competing for capturing and holding attention, because this whole notion of day trading attention, I think, is a good one and is just right. Because actually, if we are wanting to launch a new product, service, brand, whatever, we do need to day trade attention. We do need to get into people's or compete to have access to people's media consumption, and hopefully then divert them away from or out compete their drift towards other sources of data and information to ours. So standing out from the crowd is pretty key, and being able to do that is something which Gary V as he's known on his YouTube channel and elsewhere, knows quite a lot about, and his company supports a lot of global brands in achieving just that. And he's got a lot of great case studies to mention. So yeah, his social media content on YouTube and in podcast form, well worth dipping into, and then yeah, comparing and contrasting it to usual sources that you get information from. Another staple really of my bookshelf, and books which I turn to frequently just for a bit of a lift, but also to come up with new ways of thinking about a problem I might be engaging with or wanting to engage with. Robert Greene. Robert Greene's written a lot of books. They're very accessible, I would say, i.e. they're quite readable, but they're packed full of summaries of his readings of others and examples drawn from history and battles and other things. But I find that they are incredibly useful and enable me to structure things that I want to lead to persuasion, including persuading myself that I'm maybe better than I think I am. We're all subject to the imposter syndrome, and part of the everyday struggle, small s struggle, not a massive struggle, for all of us is really convincing ourselves in a repeated and ongoing way that we are better than we fear we're not, if you know what I mean. So Robert Greene's Power and Mastery, you can find excerpts of them all over the internet, of course, and they're available as audiobooks and hard copy and Kindle versions, etc. as well. So there's two very free of charge offers to you there, signposts from me and Robert Greene, which you might have to spend a bit of money on Amazon Marketplace or somewhere else to get a secondhand copy of. No point spending more money than you need to. So I think with my professional experience plus what I've learned from those authors and thinkers and a great deal of others is really that when it comes to persuading people to stay with, to consider joining, or to yeah, I think that's the two options, a brand, a company, an offer, etc. We really do need to think a lot more about having a gravitational pull that draws users, customers to us, rather than a constant push, either of information, endlessly repeating stuff, or that attempt to push people through a sales funnel, get them to sign up, but with a pop-up window for their email address, then send them an email address saying they can get send them an email saying they can get such and such a discount, but they've only got 24 minutes or 24 hours to make that choice, and all those kind of like pressury, artificial demand management type approaches, which are sort of sound great, I suspect, to those who are doing mathematical modeling of how many customers you need, etc., but it's not nice to feel that you're being pushed through a funnel, or that someone is attempting to push you through a funnel. I know it's entertaining to look at YouTube footage of those people employed on Japanese railway stations to shove commuters or other travelers into railway carriages, but actually I can't imagine anyone enjoys that experience. And the same really goes with persuasion. No one wants to feel that they're being persuaded in a robust, pressury way. It's really not the way in which the best relationships form between individual consumers and users and companies. But if you have a gravitational pull, that's all different. If your users are being drawn to you, absolutely fantastic. If someone walks by your shop window, and this is a retail skill, art, science, which has been in place for as long as we've had glass windows, possibly before. If your shop window looks amazing and draws people in, either from the merchandising or the price points or something else, amazing, that's your pull. If there's an amazing smell of freshly roasted coffee or freshly brewed coffee, and that's drawing people in, or chana masala or whatever else that's drawing people in, amazing, fantastic. If it's some kind of theater around the delivery of the product or service, an experience, even better. You might have seen the YouTube footage of exciting Turkish ice cream sellers and the things that they do with cones, or Salt Bay and his sprinkling of salt onto various apparently not very well cooked steaks. So all sorts of ways in which you can engage with the interest, the curiosity, and other emotional drivers that users have, and just how well can that work? Amazingly well. So finding ways that align with the emotional and other needs that a user or a user segment or an audience has, are forms of achieving a hold on them. If you draw someone in because of the look and the feel of your store, or the smell of the product, or the amazing virtual shop window that you have in a Shopify store or something, absolutely fantastic. But the smell or not the smell, the fragrance, the aroma which you are emitting, the emotional hit that you're communicating through your website or your merchandising, it needs to be ones which users care about. I think one of the weirdest things ever, but I see it every day as I walk down my local high street, main street type thing, is shops and cafes where they have posters, they have big shop windows, they have boards on the pavement, and it advertises the thing that they're selling, but it doesn't mention a price. It doesn't even say from such and such a price. There's just nothing. It just says the thing. Now, when you're competing for people to have, a bit of a snack or lunch, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, relatively low cost offers here. We're not talking about, a 4-course business lunch in the sushi restaurant. It's really vital that you get the information about price across, because that's, as well as the look and the feel of a place, it's probably the price which is going to be the main driver. And to have these boards with plenty of space left on them and posters with loads of space left on them, it doesn't say how much the burger and chips with a drink costs or whatever. It strikes me as an extraordinary kind of like quarter hearted attempt at achieving some persuasion and people walking by. I now know that such and such a cafe sells a burger, chips, and a drink. I have no clue at what price. There's no menu in the window even, and I don't really feel like going in and asking, because certainly in my culture, you feel quite uncomfortable about that, because you kind of think it's quite difficult to walk out once you know what the price is. So by asking the price, you're almost beginning a contract to pay that price, and the price might be high. So what do we do as British people? Well, we keep on walking. That's what we do. So that seems to me like the most crazy own goal in terms of investing in posters, investing in having a shop window, investing in boards on the street, the A-frame boards, but not putting the key information, the price on them. Anyway, there we go. So I would say there's a total misalignment there, a mistriggering of a persuasive process, because we're not aligning with the emotional and other holds or needs that I and others have as we walk by. I need to know, what it costs. I might also, if I'm, on a lunch break from work, I might also like to see that, it's going to be served within 5 minutes. That will be cool. You only tend to see that in this country, at least, in very, very big cities, where, it's important that business and other purchasers of lunch know that they can get in and out super quickly and not be late for getting back to their desk, getting back to meetings after lunch. So again, it seems to be a huge missed opportunity that even in my high street, which is not a massive city, but you could make the offer that you'll be served within, you'll get the hot food in front of you within 10 minutes, or your money back, or a free drink, or something else. But you could also become really famous in your street, in your town, possibly further afield, and persuade more and more people to come in, and also persuade other businesses to raise their game by having that kind of commitment that you live up to and literally or metaphorically deliver. So finding out what obvious or less obvious emotional needs and ways then of holding an audience or a series of users, a segmentation of users have is really important, and it's key to being effective as a business. And you can have an amazing offer, but if the offer isn't well communicated, then there's no persuasion going on, and therefore you don't have much in the way of organic growth going on with an increased customer base, and that's really serious. The other thing to bear in mind is that user and customer needs, wants, holds are different across various ways in which you might want to segment them demographically or interest or whatever else you're using as your North Star to cut through the diversity of potential users, customers. But it's also dynamic and interactive. So people's preferences might change. And we've seen lots of dietary changes in the Northern Hemisphere as the growth of vegetarianism and veganism, which is kind of somewhat on a decline, I think now. Certainly the more high-end vegan menus are decreasing in take up, but also highly interactive. So, if you begin to disappoint people, that has consequences. If you delight people, if you extend your offer and you persuade people to bridge from one thing into another, then that also works really well. Once you've pulled people in, you then have the permission and the opportunity to upsell, cross-sell, and other things. So they come in for a coffee, and perhaps you can sell them a coffee and a cake, or a coffee subscription is being attempted in this country. We'll see how that works out. So for all of those kind of touch points, I suppose the important thing to bear in mind is you need to have a structured approach for understanding how to trigger persuasion and to manage the effectiveness of trying to get people to consider your brand, your offer, your service, your product, and hopefully stick with it and proceed as they've initially been pulled towards you, and now the challenge is to maintain the power of that gravitational pull, or even increase it, without necessarily doing any of the heavy-handed pushing. And touching back on linking back to what I said about Chris Do in the future, lots of his YouTube videos mention service design and that whole discipline, which is a new one for me to think about, I have to say, but it's actually a fairly it's a new way of describing a fairly obvious logical process that applies to many activities that take place within businesses. But service design is really I guess a way of capturing the touch points that an individual has with a thing, whether that's signing up to pay your tax, or from seeing the shop window of the cafe through to the aroma of the coffee beans, through to how the door opens, through to the layout of the shop, yada yada yada, all that stuff. It's all service design. Every element of it should be thought through in terms of, is it okay as it is? Does it need to be changed? How does it contribute towards cementing the commitment of the individual that they are sticking with their dynamic, persuasive process, which might mean, of course, that as soon as you get in, and if there's then some kind of friction or contradiction, that they then reverse out. And it's quite fascinating sitting in shops sometimes, or cafes more accurately, and actually seeing people fall off the back of a queue. And I never like to see that, but it's very interesting to see, because there's a reason, and the reason often is service is very slow. So, if you're in the business of selling coffee and associated drinks, hot, cold, whatever else, brewed, non-brewed, speed, not having a very visibly moving line or queue is really important. So considering the whole service design element, really, really important. If you've got a queue that you can't speed up, then you might want to have ways of managing that, which might be to have a staff member who cannot assist in speeding up the queue, actually kind of keep people in queue by walking up and down the line and offering them apologies, welcomes, but also maybe free samples of bits of chopped up muffin of the day or whatever, and that helps. Okay, that's a bit of a push, bit of a psychological trick, I suppose, because it then makes it slightly more difficult, if not a lot more difficult, for those individuals to reverse off the back of the queue. But you've invested the effort. There's a gift being transacted, being handed over, and it's still ethical. And of course, anyone could do that with any queue in anywhere, whether it's for a train or a cup of coffee, but not many people do. The other element to consider around service design, beyond authenticity and consistency of experience between branches or whatever, is the fact that our expectation of how the process should unfold is raised by our experiences elsewhere. So that means really that a very unpleasant experience that people would have had to have put up with in the past because there wasn't competition either directly or from other providers of other things, we can no longer, generally speaking, get away with those behaviors, either because people will go somewhere else, or they'll complain or be grumpy, or leave bad feedback, etc. And no company should be affording that. Equally, if people are disappointed constantly by their engagements with government, public services, then that means they're more likely, I suppose, to find ways to minimize taxes or even towards tax avoidance, just because they feel they don't get good service, they're not cared for by their government. So we can't rely on people's loyalty, whether we're looking out from the perspective of a business, looking through our shop window at the people in the streets, or whether we are a government department thinking about the users of our services and the people that we need to pay through some of those services, so that we've got money to spend on other services, and also to support those small businesses out there doing their best to struggle through in difficult times. One of the other learning points I've picked up very, very recently from Chris Doe actually was around the use of service design in enabling companies, businesses which are in direct competition to improve their offer. And that therefore means that you need to persuade people to stay with you or defect from the neighboring cafe, kebab shop, dog groomer, medical office, university, whatever else, through very, very carefully thinking about that service design. If you are the cafe which has a line out the door over your lunchtime, you need to know why that is to make sure that you keep doing the right thing. If you are the cafe that doesn't have that line and you only have a small number of loyal people who keep coming, or a number of people who come once and never come back, you need to know why that is as well. And you also need to know why your rival is doing super well themselves. And that's where the structured service design approach should help you to create and maintain an approach towards persuasion, persuade people to stay, persuade people to move, persuade people to give you a chance, in a methodical and evidenced way. Doesn't need to be slow, doesn't need to be outsourced, doesn't need to be expensive, but it does need to be kind of structured and reliable, and to be kind of at least semi-scientific. My experience has been most recently in higher education, and my efforts at a university in the UK were really to humanize the whole process of finding out information about a program of study, of attending events to try and get people to sign up for the program that I ran. But my approach was every other university sends a marketing person. Now, actually, if you are someone, let's say an adult, slightly later in life, considering study, you don't have any family record of going to university, you don't know what it's like really. The last time you wrote essays, you were terrified of it, you weren't great at it, or it was okay, but just took an incredibly long time, then actually dealing with an academic who will be teaching on the program that the university is trying to sell you is really, really important. So frequently I was the only academic in a room full of marketers who were trying to pitch their universities, their programs. And of course, they were only able to say, if you've got academic queries, I can take your question away and get back to you, or here's an email address you could approach. Whereas with me, I'm right there. And if you've got an issue about how to write an essay, I can sort of say, if you've got 2 minutes, I'll talk you through a way in which, you know, you can structure it and, you know, basically make that process as simple as possible. So that was a situation of where people could directly compare and compete, or there was competition. They could directly compare and see competition between the universities who'd only sent marketing people, that was most of them, and myself representing the university doing marketing, but as an academic. So that worked really well for me and the university. And again, it's an approach which I think has a lot of merit and has a lot of extensibility to it, to other sectors, but also to turn it to your own advantage. And that triggers thoughts of consideration, or maybe closing a deal psychologically, which is incredibly persuasive, but in quite a subtle way. So yeah, that's a process I developed myself, and I kind of recommend, you know, really fronting up with your persona, with your personality, with your approach to things, because people buy people. That's a very old-fashioned marketing term, but it's as much the case these days for virtual services as it is for classic product in bricks and mortar establishments. So in terms of the bar being raised by other experiences, that kind of hero effect, or effect of hero brands, you know, consider how now we are so, or many of us at least, maybe not everybody on this call, but many of us are kind of conditioned by the super slickness of Amazon selling, and also Amazon returns if something doesn't meet expectations or is broken or whatever. One click selling, you know, very few click for returning something. It's really changed the playing field for all other companies, and I think in a really good way. It benefits consumers. It may not benefit all businesses, but certainly benefits consumers. Shopify as an amazing platform with all sorts of additional software that you can get from the Shopify community to really streamline how you do resale online. Amazing for brands as big as Gymshark, and as small as someone selling, you know, bespoke wedding cards. Amazing. But again, given how quickly you can set up a Shopify shop or an Etsy shop or whatever else, again, for anyone offering other products and services which take a long time to set up, and you need to do lots of endless scrolling through tutorials, that's not going to work. So yes, the bar has very much been raised by those experiences, and I felt that in higher education as well. And my effort really with higher education is always to make things as clear and obvious as to the expectations, for example, for an essay, for a project, for a dissertation, in the same way as it's totally clear what you need to do in order to buy something at Amazon, or to compare cars on various car sales sites. Any sector where even now it's very difficult to compare and contrast products and services, the longevity of that approach and the safety of being behind those kind of difficult to fathom industries is you know, their shelf life is very limited indeed, because someone will come along and cut through all of that, and that will be good for consumers, but again, not necessarily good for incumbents in those spaces. So for any digital interaction, and I think beyond that, any interaction full stop, we've come to expect really great, the effects of really great service design and service delivery and user experience and customer experience. And we know that from bricks and mortar establishments that continue to do super well, those which are closing, platforms which are doing super well online, and those which are fading and which we don't even remember the names anymore. So when it comes to requesting, hoping that people will use our platform, will pay our taxes, your taxes, will stay with us, will continue to use an airline, etc., etc., then we really are talking about a fascinating and everything to play for style approach that's needed, where it is about art as well as science. There is some science there in terms of the fact that there will be, if a company is well set up with appropriate metrics, there will be potentially an awful lot of data to show what it is people are doing, are liking, are saying, etc. But it doesn't mean that we can't be out competed, even if we're doing super well. And it doesn't mean that we always have complete confidence in correlation as opposed to, in causation as opposed to correlation. We don't entirely know that a new campaign has led to more people being persuaded that they should consider our brand or give it a chance. We don't know if we have an amazing entry offer that people will continue. We shouldn't rely on people forgetting that they've got subscriptions or other ongoing financial commitments to us, because actually that can be, those things can be ended very, very quickly. And there are opportunities for money to be made in that space as well. So on quite a few of the podcasts that I listen to, which are American or at least hosted on American podcast platforms, there's been a lot of mention of a company called Rocket Money, I think it is. And that only works in the US at the moment, I believe. But it's a way of reviewing all of the subscriptions that you currently have that you may have forgotten about. Could be for newspapers, could be for products, could be for all sorts of things. And with seemingly one click, you then get a long list of, or a short list of all the subscriptions you've got, some of which you've forgotten about, and you can cancel them within that app. And Rocket Money will do all of the behind the scenes gnaws, I guess you'd call it, of closing those subscriptions down that you don't want anymore. Now, I kind of think that the inertia of subscription and of relatively small amounts, which we never really kind of look at in our bank statements, or we might not look at, might not even notice, I think that inertia is probably powering quite a lot of companies out there, and they have really assumed that it'll always, that revenue is always going to be reliable, and there will be no easy way for people to quickly work out how they can cancel their subscriptions, and particularly those platforms which have aced the very unpleasant and I think pretty unethical model of easy onboarding for subscriptions, very difficult offboarding. So where you actually need to call and speak to someone if you want to end your subscription, or you go through almost all the process online, but then at the end you need to call someone, or someone needs to call you to actually check that you really want to leave. And that, of course, is an opportunity to stop them leaving and offer them an amazing deal. But also it is that transfer from the anonymity, the transactional nature of doing things online, where we're not actually telling a person to their face or to their ear, I want to leave. We're just doing it by clicking. And fewer people are going to stick with it and take the call or make the call to actually close a subscription. Now, that only works in a not very nice way, as long as there's no way of bypassing that. But it seems that Rocket Money, hope I've got the name of that right, pretty sure it definitely has rocket in it, and I think it's Rocket Money. Rocket Money have found some way of sorting that hurdle there. So if, for example, you are considering, or your customer is considering, moving to or expanding a subscription model for growth, continuity, then that value proposition that's being offered always needs to be refreshed, because rivals are setting up. There might be better value propositions out there in something totally different. Someone might think, actually, I can get my cat food in the shop, and I'm going to take out a subscription for something else, which is more interesting. I'll save money on that and instead invest in subscription bones for my dogs, or skincare for myself, or whatever. So when it comes to persuasion is also not a one-off, one-hit thing, unless you're selling a high margin, let's hope, thing, and then you only want to do it, or you are only able to do it once in a while. But with a subscription or lower margin, higher volume type sales, that refreshing of a value proposition needs to occur constantly. And that really means that we are constantly in the processing of persuading and re-persuading people to stay with us, or to consider us, even give us an opportunity. And that is almost moving towards a conversational approach with, or wanting a conversational approach relationship with potential customers and users, or current users and customers. And that, I think, requires a very different way of thinking and acting and business models behind the scenes to make that possible. It also means that when it comes to delivering a subscription process through a Shopify front end, then the brands which are doing really, really well in this space allow incredibly easy ways for you to manage that subscription. So I subscribe to an Australian company, Knobby, Knobby, which designs and sells very, very interesting underwear and socks. And if you want to pause your subscription, there's no cost for it. It's not like when some of these services set up a few years ago and there were penalties for that, or if you had to skip a month very early, otherwise you'd still get deducted the money for that month. Fabletics, I think, was a company which started out doing that. That's not an approach which has longevity, sustainability, or ethics, I think, at the heart of the offer. So allowing super flexible terms, allowing the user to pause and restart, or even increase the frequency of what it is that they've signed up for, absolutely fantastic. Knobby have extended their value proposition from underwear into socks as well. And as we all know, socks have a weird habit of one of the members of the pair disappearing. So we always need to refresh our stocks of socks. Another element, I think, which is overlooked a lot, but which people like Gary Vaynerchuk certainly speak about an awful lot, is around the importance of content creation and curation as feeding through. He doesn't really talk about this, but in other words kind of does, as feeding through into that ongoing process of persuasion and that conversation with consumers, potential consumers. And that really is quite important, I think, in many competitive spaces like real estate agency, as we call it in the UK, but real estate in the US and elsewhere, where it's so competitive, and it's very difficult to work out, I believe, which one to use for selling or buying a house. Let's say you're a seller, you don't know which one to choose. They all offer roughly the same fees. You don't really know which ones are more effective than others because you've got no easy way of comparing. So it's it's a market with incomplete information. But if an estate agent has a strong following in the local community because they have a weekly radio show about real estate and property maintenance type issues, or engages a lot with the local business community and is a kind of a doer and a fixer in a local business and community, or is out there helping on a voluntary basis, all sorts of great social projects, then that becomes part of the offer around the estate agency, which is their day job, if you like, which helps build the opportunity to try and persuade or to have a gravitational pull with people in the future. So Gary Vaynerchuk, and I've seen lots of other people do this as well, are very keen on suggesting that you should give away as much as possible in terms of information and advice, because that content is valuable, or you'll discover if it's valuable or not if people say that it's valuable. But it also means that you will get that back in other forms down the road. If you do great things in the local community, if you are a useful source of information about the local community, if you selflessly support people with information, guidance, making connections, helping networking, doing great things in the community for the elderly, the disadvantaged, whatever, that is doing good in the moment, which is super ethical. Excuse me. But also that comes back around because you are doing things which other estate agents, realtors are not. And that's a point of differentiation. And that differentiation will matter to some users, the potential customers. It will chime with an emotional or other need or hold or preference that they have, or a way of valuing you. It may align with their religious or spiritual views. And that is an opportunity from every single one of those moments, those touch points, those service design experiences, if you like, which could pay back. And that doesn't mean that we should only do things because we know they're going to give us a direct benefit, because as before with my thoughts about correlation and causation, we don't know precisely how this will pay back, or when, or with and from whom, but they're good to do anyway, and therefore they're good to do, they should be done, and they can only be beneficial in the short, medium and long term. And I've certainly met quite a lot of small business owners recently, both offering tuition, running restaurants, and some consultancy, where they have had really impressive growth, purely because of the personality they bring to social media. And then when you meet them in person, they're exactly the same or better. And they've got points of differentiation there online and in the real world. And that means actually they are going to be very, very difficult to compete against. They have lower overheads because people are drawn to them no matter where they're based, because they like what they've seen, heard, experienced. So the persuasion there to go to X part of town you wouldn't normally go to is already been done, because you've met these people virtually, or you've seen the effects of their tuition business on outcomes of kids, for example, in exams, and therefore, there's not much more persuasion needs to be done. They really want to know how and when to sign up. So from content creation and curation through to increased bottom line, increased revenue, long-term customer value, and all that kind of stuff, I think podcasts are high profile in the local community, or even beyond that, really, really important and often overlooked by individuals and businesses. And just before I shift on to questions and answers then, I really wanted to touch on another area of business theory, which is not taught in a great deal of business schools, but really ought to be. And that's the concept of blue ocean. And this was initially created by two academics working at, or I think one was working, one was maybe a guest faculty member at INSEAD in Paris. And the whole blue ocean approach is really interesting because, well, interesting to me, interesting because it suggests that we should move away from the red ocean characterized by companies visualized as sharks in this model, which are constantly fighting with one another to secure the lowest possible price for a commodity, an item, a service, and therefore the water is red with blood, because both parties are really racing to the bottom of what's possible in terms of just about breaking even, and therefore they are taking chunks out of one another and cannibalizing one another, as it were, for customers. But it really means that it's difficult to increase prices, difficult to increase margin, difficult to really do very much in terms of compete other than on price, and that's a very bad space to be in. The alternative is the blue ocean, where your competition is, well, the seas are calmer. You might be the first into that space, and therefore there might be no competition at all. So it's up to you to define both the quality standards, the elements that people should be taking into account when they make a decision and are, being persuaded, reaching a persuasive outcome. And yeah, really you are in control of almost all the variables. But one of the other elements of blue ocean, which is even less frequently spoken about and taught, is the universe of non-customers or ex-customers. And this is a kind of a view that we should, of course, always be seeking to attract new customers or advocates, ambassadors for our products or services. But we should also be thinking about the non-customers or the former customers as potential oceans, if you like, that we can swim in. And being able to reach back to former customers, and hopefully we've offboarded them in a way in which they don't leave us with any sense of injustice or having been treated unethically or something. That's why it's so important not to offboard customers in bad ways or to make it really, really difficult, because it makes onboarding them or re-onboarding them so much easier. But also there might be non-customers, people who've never ever thought about such and such a thing, and they may also be non-customers of our competitors. But if we reframe the value proposition that we're extending, then we may be able to persuade them to consider the thing we're offering, even though they've never thought about it before, and our competitors would also never think of approaching these people who have never thought about the thing we're offering. So if people have never considered, let's say, a fresh fish subscription service where they get a weekly delivery of very recently harvested fished fish or shellfish or something, and we are going to target a particular segment of the community, which we have identified through talking to people and discovering that there's this unmet need. Could be, for example, people recovering from, so let's say they're recovering from surgery or some clinical experience which hasn't been great, and so they need lots of very easy to digest protein and omega-3 fatty oils and other things. Then actually the local fishmonger may just have a shop, may do a few deliveries to a few customers once in a while. But if we are identifying people whose appetite needs a bit of stimulation, who need easily digestible protein, etc., and we can partner with pharmacies or doctors' offices or district nurses or something, and find ways to incentivize them to maybe pitch our product into the people that they visit who are rehabilitating, recovering, then we can reach non-customers or ex-customers. Non-customers could even be easier to persuade to adopt something than people who are ex-customers or ex-customers of a competitor of ours. So there's always new ways of getting involved in the persuasion game, if you like, and it, to some degree, it is a bit of a game. And there won't be any simple to follow action plans out there which will work for the fresh fish and shellfish subscription service that would also work for personal trainers or whatever, which I think to me is quite exciting, because it means, going back to the toolkit analogy, you must consider ways in which you can create individual approaches that enable you to identify and cement relationships with people you know really, really well, or find people in the same way that strangers are just friends you haven't made yet. Find non-customers who are just customers you haven't met yet, and persuade them to give you a chance to think about engaging with your brand, your service, your subscription, or something else. So that's been quite a wide-ranging discussion. Well, not really a discussion so much as a pitch from me, really, about why persuasion is, of course, super important, and some hints, tips, approaches in which you could make it your own and make it a super skill of yourself, and be of benefit either to the business you run, the business you want to run, or businesses that you work with as a consultant in future in the public or private sector, or even the third sector, because charities are also competing for support and commitment from patrons, donors, as much as businesses are between customer segments. So I hope that's been interesting, and I'll look forward to any questions that you have.
All right, guys, feel free to go ahead and ask your questions. You can type it in the chat box, and I'm also watching at the social media screens. So if anybody has any question, feel free to go ahead and ask. Thank you. All right, guys, any question? Yes, no, maybe, please type it in. So, Dr. Hills, I don't see any questions popping up as of now. So,
Wowzers. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll just wait for another few seconds.
Yeah,
There
of
isn't
course.
any. We
Yeah,
are going to go ahead
absolutely.
and end. Yeah,
Mm.
thank you. All right, I don't see any questions. So I guess we are going to go ahead and end the session then. Thank you once again, all of you, for being a part of this session.
Definitely.
And thank you, Dr. Hills, once again for enlightening us with your life experiences and helping our learners learn the art of persuasion today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, then. So on that note, this is us signing off, and we wish you all the best for your future, and you hope you have a wonderful day ahead. Bye-bye. Take care and stay safe. Thank you.